Welcome to VPG's Virtual Water Cooler Chat Podcast, a platform that features professionals across a variety of industries and promotes growth mindset principles with a central pillar of championing the achievements of women. Our conversations explore a wide spectrum of backgrounds, experiences, and perspectives, creating a vibrant mosaic that enriches our collective understanding and strengthens our commitment to growth and empowerment. Our guest interviewer is Ethan Woe, a curious STEM student and civil engineering graduate from UC Irvine, who is taking time to explore the IP space. Today, Ethan is speaking with Wesley White, a trial attorney and litigation partner at Orrick, who represents plaintiffs and defendants in high-stakes patent disputes in district and administrative courts across the country. He has handled complex disputes across a diverse range of technology sectors, including virtualization and cloud computing, encryption and compression technology, video media streaming, web and mobile applications, and medical and surgical devices. Wesley's achievements have earned him recognition as a Super Lawyers and Managing IP Rising Star in intellectual property disputes. He was named to Law Dragon's 2023 inaugural 500 XNet Generation Rising Stars list. Let's get started.
I'd first like to explain who I am. My name's Ethan Woe. I am a litigation assistant for Virtual Patent Gateway. I appreciate you being here. Thank you for this opportunity. And I'd also like to thank Ashley from VPG for the opportunity as well. How are you doing today?
I'm doing well, and thanks so much for having me here today. I'm very excited to have the opportunity to sit with you and talk more about developments in my practice and my journey to getting to the seat.
Yes, I'm really excited too. I saw, obviously a little bit on LinkedIn about your journey, so I'm very interested to learn more about it. So why don't you start first with, if you can just say a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, sure. So again, very happy to be here today. My name is Wes White. I'm an IP litigation partner at Orrick, Harrington, and Sutcliffe in New York City. In terms of me, I'm originally from Augusta, Georgia, and I'm the youngest in a relatively large family, depending on how you count it. So, I had a background that was very traditional, lived in the same house literally from birth until I went off to undergraduate. And I went to undergrad in Atlanta, Georgia, where I studied at Morehouse College and the Georgia Institute of Technology, also known as Georgia Tech. While I was there, I was able to participate in a dual degree engineering program that was offered by Morehouse and a consortium of schools there. Went to Georgia Tech as well and graduated in 2006 with 2 bachelor's degrees, one in applied physics from Morehouse and a second in electrical engineering from Georgia Tech. Then from there, it was off to New York City, where I worked at Goldman Sachs in New York and Chicago for 5 years. After Goldman Sachs in 2011, I went to Cambridge, Massachusetts, where I studied at Harvard Law School, graduated in 2014, and then somehow came back to New York City, where I've been now for the better part of a decade at various firms.
That's really cool. So I'm excited to learn more about that. You named the podcast Lean Into the Pivot. Can you explain what that means or why you chose that title?
Yeah, sure, Ethan. So, I think for me, if you went back 30 odd years ago and I told my younger self that one day I would be a big law partner living in New York City, there's a very slim chance that I would have believed Future West, just because that was so far afield from what I had envisioned or contemplated for myself. Like literally all I wanted to do was move from Augusta, Georgia to Atlanta, which was the big city, and have season tickets to the Braves, Falcons, and Hawks, and stuff like that. And, that was as far as I was thinking. So it's just, in terms of leaning into the pivot, you hear the term pivot thrown around a lot, but when you actually look at the meaning of the term, there's one aspect of it that's really interesting to me, at least. And that's particularly in a business context, the ability to completely change the way in which one does something. And as I look back and reflect on my career journey, there's a lot of pivoting basically where maybe something didn't go exactly the way that was initially planned. And, whether that was purposeful or not, like really embracing it, leaning into the pivot, so to speak, and looking to utilize the next experience or the next opportunity to further my journey and to acquire skills and experiences along the way. And so, that's really reflective, I think, of how I've tried to live, whether my life personally or how I've tried to navigate my professional career, just in terms of always being adaptable to change, thinking strategically about what you're looking to get out of opportunities, positioning and advocating for yourself to get the next opportunity, and then, basically just rinsing and repeating to get to the next level, however you ultimately define the next level for yourself.
I'm excited to be the one interviewing for this because I told you a little bit already, but I graduated in civil engineering and then worked for a year or so, and now I'm working now or looking into more of like the field of law, trying to lean into that pivot of changing what my career is. I'm excited to learn a bit more. So I know you said that for your undergrad, you went to Morehouse and you went to Georgia Tech, and then you did applied physics and electrical engineering there, and then 5 years at Goldman Sachs. How did you end up deciding on law school, or what got you change careers basically?
Going back to a fairly early age, I knew I had an interest in math and science. So originally, the first thing I can vividly remember wanting to be as an adult was a astronaut. That clearly did not come to pass, but there was always kind of that seed of math and science. So, I also at the time had a couple of influential cousins and family friends who were in college and then who became professionals as engineers. So that was what steered me into engineering as a potential career. And, to nurture that, I was going to tons of science camps and math camps and things of that nature as a kid. And for high school, I tested into a health science and engineering magnet school, A.R. Johnson in Augusta. That was, very highly ranked, at least at the time. And so I was in this path where it was very much the plan is engineering, and I was in pursuit of that goal. From the time I started at undergrad, I was able to secure an internship at the time with General Electric Energy, which was a prominent player in the space. Yeah. So I spent several summers doing these engineering internships. And, I turned around, I'm a couple of years in, approaching graduation, and I had the revelation one day that I'm not entirely sure I want to spend the rest of my career being an engineer, which was a problem because at that point I spent a lot of time, not to say money, in pursuit of being an engineer. And so that really, prompted me to take a step back and think about what I foresaw myself doing for the next 5, 10, or however many years. And if there were any opportunities to take skills and experiences I had accrued to date and apply those elsewhere in a way where they weren't a complete waste. And after doing some research, sitting down, speaking with a number of people, I started to hone in on this concept of patent law and the idea that it would be a place of immense interest and opportunity for me, given the background that I had in the science and engineering. At the time, I went to, again, General Electric Energy and said, hey, would you mind if I do my next rotation with the legal department instead of somewhere in engineering? And they were tremendously receptive of that. The next summer I interned with the legal department, was one of, if not the best internships I've ever had
that's awesome.
in my life. The story was written from there. Now, in line with the title of the episode, there were a number of twists and turns or pivots along the way. But, that being said, I did ultimately wind up at the destination of working in IP and patent law.
Wow, that's really cool. That's awesome that you were able to get that internship pretty early on, see how much you loved it and enjoyed it. Was IP law specifically because that's what General Electric did, or did you just talk to other people in patent? What ended up being I want to do patent law?
Yeah. I mean, so there were a couple of options, right? I pretty much honed in pretty quickly on the concept of IP law / tech law. And, further on, especially when I got to law school and was able to do my 1L and 2L summers, I did have experiences working with IP law and specifically patent litigation versus, maybe things in copyright, trademark. And, also if you look at the other side of the house, there's prosecution, where instead of litigating the patents, you're helping people apply for and obtain the patents. And then relatedly, if you go over into corporate law, you have transactional law that's related to technology transactions and things of that sort. So I was aware of them, did research into all of them. Again, I think it's always helpful just to talk with as many people as you can about what they do in their day-to-day, how they like it or not, and, what your experiences are, what's transferable, and what they think you would need to do to be in a place to succeed. So a lot of conversations, again, was able to test it out in a couple of internships, and ultimately I just decided that the best fit that I foresaw in terms of what kept me interested was more so on the IP litigation side of things. Just, again, it's a very unique place where you're helping people, especially now as the role has evolved with, kind of comprehensive strategies, even beyond litigation, but ultimately you're trying to help, key innovators in the technology space and industry, have incentives to create new and exciting things and to protect those new and exciting things that they've created. So it's been a lot of fun.
That's really interesting. I think that's definitely one part that I find pretty cool with just technology and innovation and all that compared to other fields of law. I graduated in civil engineering. Electrical engineering is a little more, they kind of look for that a little more, I'd say, right? So I was always a little worried about going from civil to looking into it. But I think I agree, or I think multiple people have said that you can get into it though. And would you
Yeah.
agree with that?
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, like speaking to that point, I think there is a misconception. And I think that sometimes because people aren't exactly knowledgeable about the space, and I think sometimes people use terms in ways that are, I don't want to say misleading, but that don't give full color to, what's going on. So I think there's this misconception that you have to have a hard science or engineering background to get into and succeed in patent law or IP law. And that's totally not the case. For example, there's a requirement to have that type of degree or background if you want to, sit for the patent bar, deals with representation before the Patent and Trademark Office. But again, things have evolved such that now when we're in these post-grant proceedings like IPRs, PGRs, things of that sort, to the extent that we need to appear before the Patent and Trademark Appeals Board or, before the ALJs or APJs in an administrative proceeding, we can just pro hoc in almost like any other district court or other proceeding. So, I think that's one thing. And I think, just in terms of the nitty gritty day to day, like sometimes, yes, I think it is helpful to have a particular background. And, if we're being honest, there are some clients that feel more strongly than others about having specific types of backgrounds on their matters. But, I think you'll find that nothing is a hard and fast rule. And it's certainly the case that people without hard science or engineering backgrounds, whether that's EE or otherwise, come into the space and perform tremendously, like on a daily basis, right? Because ultimately, what I like to tell folks, I do trials and they involve patents or technologies, but a trial is a trial. And you have a set of facts and you're attempting to develop a story or a narrative that's going to convince a fact finder, whether that's a judge or whether it's a jury. And ultimately, my background a lot of times just helps me because I have that past experience wrestling with complex technological text and I don't shy away from it. But, at the end of the day, as long as you're someone who has that type of personality, the willingness to roll up your sleeves and really dig in, wrestle with the technology to figure out what the ins and outs are so that you can then engage with experts, your client, to further understand and develop your story, anyone can be successful. And we see it all the time.
That's awesome to hear. Do you think that the feeling that they want specifically, like electrical or CS, depending on what you're on, do you think that's becoming less of a, clients would prefer, or that they're understanding that other people can also, that aren't in these hard set STEM degrees, can also do? Does that make sense what I'm trying to ask?
Yeah, no, so it totally makes sense. And I do think it's probably trending in that direction, right? Because I think at this point, there's just more of a track record. There's a demonstrated history of folks coming in without that background and succeeding. And as clients see that and get more comfortable with it, they're more willing to take the word of the senior attorneys that this person is going to come on. They may not have a particular background, but I know they have the type of personality and, just the skills basically to handle this type of case. So I think that's one aspect. I think the other thing is we live in a world where people are just increasingly cross-disciplinary and where there's more of an expectation of collaboration across, divisions, whether it's practice groups, business units, whatever the case may be. So even on the business side, I think our clients are now just more used to that type of cross-disciplinary contribution and the understanding that just because someone may not have a particular credential or degree, is more of a jumping off point for conversations and shouldn't be a showstopper necessarily in terms of whether that person is a good fit to work on their matters.
Wow, that's great to hear. So you said at least your electrical obviously helped for some of those harder, more technical parts that you need to really dive deep into. Do you think that your undergraduate STEM degrees helped in other ways, directly or indirectly, with your career or just growth in general?
Yeah, I mean, I think, so even now, even if I'm not using those STEM degrees for the specific subject matter of my case, I think just that type of training has been immensely helpful in terms of my ability to navigate and to succeed in my current role, right? A lot of it is just attention to detail, kind of a rigor around planning and how you attack a problem, breaking it down to its constituent parts and addressing those and figuring out where, kind of the key dependencies are and that sort of thing. I use that type of stuff stuff every day. I think another thing, and I may have alluded to it a few minutes ago, is it's just interesting. For example, I don't know if you've seen some of the stories in the media recently about younger generations, and you have people graduating to elite or well-respected institutions, and the professors are saying, they're having trouble wrestling with and completing full books that have been on the curricula for years, right? Like what's different change. And, a lot of it is just frankly how all of us, regardless of generation, have changed significantly the way we consume information. I personally see it a lot in myself, which I have to wrestle with on a continuous basis, but I really see it with my kids. I have two boys who are 7 and 9. And just, again, how they approach consuming information. I know my oldest at one point, he had a question about an assignment, and I said, look it up. And his first instinct was to grab his iPad and ask Siri. And it's like, I don't know if you should do that. But then, we talked about it, and it's like, well, like maybe you should, right? And the question isn't, should you or should you not use Siri? It's how do you use it? How do you now filter out what are good sources of information, bad sources of information? And you're saying the same thing now with generative AI, right? Like you can't, have people who are sticking their head in the sand about these tools. It's more so, how are you going to be on the cutting edge of figuring out how to leverage these tools to advance your own particular causes? So, all of that to say, with my STEM degrees, a lot of it is literally just the ability to really dig in and work through a lengthy, complex set of materials or facts and figure out what matters and what doesn't, right? I've had situations where I've been working with a major company on their antenna engineers on products that aren't coming out for a couple of years, and, quickly having to get in, figure out what's key and what's not on things that haven't even been released yet, so that I can have an informed conversation with the engineers. That's the kind of thing that my STEM training and background has trained me for, regardless of subject matter or not. So I think, just in terms of subject matter, and then I think in terms of certain innate skills that are very useful for what we do, like my STEM background and degrees have played a pivotal role in developing those skills.
That's really interesting to hear, just how much it's helped. And then also you're saying about generative AI stuff, it's like, you need to learn at least how to filter out what's good, what's bad. Obviously, like students are using it, but I didn't realize how like normal it was for them to use it now, like they call it just chat now. I heard some of these like high schoolers, they just call it chat. They're like, ask chat. Yeah. I was like, what is chat? But then, So it's crazy how much it's like been ingrained kind of into younger generations, especially. Going into our next question, what do you enjoy most about being a big law partner?
I think being a big law partner is interesting, and whatever we tend to perceive it as young associates, or whatever we tend to perceive it as in terms of depictions we've seen in TV and the movies and books. There are aspects of all of that, but it's different at the same time, right? At the end of the day, what I enjoy most about it is being able to partner with people to help them solve problems that are important or critical for them and the goals that they have for their teams, their companies, right? And what I think I've found that I really enjoy is I have this toolkit of skills that are broadly perceived as legal or the law. And, I'm relying on those on a daily basis, but no one wakes up in the morning and says, oh, what I really want to do is solve a legal problem. So how I try and really approach things are taking, what I need from my toolkit and trying to approach things from the perspective of being, kind of yet another partner with the business as I'm working with my clients to help them advance their business objectives, and really, kind of reframing the problems in that sense. Something that I love in particular is when I'm able to tap into my prior experiences, because at this point I've worked in finance, worked in the law, I've worked in technology and engineering as well. So, I have kind of this vast array of experiences, and also an increasingly expansive network of people, and really, having conversations with people, figuring out what their problems are, and then, being very thoughtful in how I reach back to prior experiences or people, connect them together to help people solve their problems in a way that either exceeds their expectations, or maybe it's a solution to a problem that they either never contemplated or they never even knew they had the particular problem. And I think, when you see that happen a couple of times, that's, kind of where the magic is for me. And those are the things that I enjoy about being a big law partner and that keep me coming back, into the office day after day.
On an obviously smaller scale, I agree, like with at least that train of thinking, obviously. I'm not obviously a big law partner, but like I enjoy that part of looking into it and really like trying to find problems. Looking, I guess being proactive, I guess like would be a good word I would use for
Absolutely.
that. I really enjoyed, at least even in my last job and stuff like that. What are clients most concerned about today, like from an IP perspective, that might not have been something that would have been like, on the radar 10 years ago? What's changed now, basically?
So it's interesting because at this point, I've been in the field for over a decade, which is odd even to say that it's been that long. But, I think I have seen a couple things. And one of those is that clients in general are a lot more savvy now in terms of starting fairly early to think about, one, how they're going to cultivate a comprehensive IP portfolio, and then two, how they can begin using and leveraging that IP portfolio in ways where they can deploy it both offensively and defensively, and generally just giving themselves some freedom to operate. And, I think you see that because these markets are, getting increasingly competitive. The way technology, the internet, and things of that sort have developed, the barriers to entry in many ways have lessened. So you have more competitive markets at this point. You can have a lot of people who have, very similarly situated offerings. And so to the extent that you have things like brand recognition or you have true innovation, whether that's through a patent or a trade secret or copyright, those kinds of things now can very much be the key differentiators between winners and losers. So whereas before, I think kind of strategic use of IP was not always top of mind for a lot of clients or people in the space, even for smaller early stage companies, you're starting to see more attention to that with the understanding that a little bit of strategic thought and spin now can save a lot of non-strategic spin and, just general angst down the line.
I just read a book called You Are an IP Company. I don't know if you've heard of it, but
I have, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that was pretty good, at least mindset wise, obviously, for anybody, going into it, for business or yourself. I think that follows kind of what you're saying about how people are like realizing that now. At least be proactive about that. Make sure you are on top of, make yourself not have a headache later. Make sure you save your company or revenue or whatever in the future.
Exactly.
Looking back, would you change anything about your career trajectory and how you, knowing what you know now?
It's an interesting question. I don't know if I necessarily would have changed anything about the career trajectory. I think for the most part, everything that has happened happened when it needed to happen. And, that's a different question than whether I was ready for it or not. Sometimes you're ready for it and sometimes you just have to rise to the challenge. Ultimately, I think, it was a very measured progression. Again, a number of pivots, stops, sometimes anticipated in different, whether it's geographic or in terms of the subject matter. But in hindsight, I can see now how it all fits together and how I'm leveraging each of those stops, each of those experiences in a meaningful way even today. So, ultimately, I have no complaints about the career trajectory. If anything, I would say maybe take a calculated risk earlier or more often. I think lawyers tend to be risk-averse people. I think over time you get more comfortable with that risk as you have more exposure to more experiences and just see how some of those calculated risks can work out.
Yeah, absolutely. I definitely agree with that. I mean, or at least going forward, I'm trying to be, making sure I'm not regretting or like waiting too long to, make a decision on something, or whether it's career wise or personal wise. But yeah, that's great advice. Okay. And then lastly, following up on advice, what advice would you give a young associate interested in IP litigation who might not have technical background? We kind of talked about it earlier, but what advice would you give them?
Yeah, I mean, just kind of elaborating on what we talked about before, definitely not looking at, regardless of background, and in particular, if you don't necessarily have kind of the traditional technical backgrounds, I would say instead of background, think about aptitude and attitude as being determinative in terms of success. And, I think that applies here and generally just, again, first and foremost, bringing a positive attitude and a willingness to learn, a willingness to be independent and to go out and proactively seek to solve problems without a lot of oversight. Like that alone will get you a long way. Again, like just good reading habits, getting books on a subject. You can sometimes watch YouTube videos. Often there'll be white papers and things of that sort. So ultimately, there are a number of publicly available sources, like usually in the outset, that you can use to get a pretty decent handle on the subject matter that you're going to be working with. And, again, myself, after many years in practice, regardless of the technical degrees, like a lot of times when I am starting work on a new matter, going to the bookstore and ordering a book or two to help me figure out what the technology is and what I need to be aware of. It's getting time to speak with the engineers, eventually working with your technical experts and talking with them, getting the benefit of their years of experience in the space. These are always generally very technical, complex matters, and technical degree or not, we all have to be willing to put in some time and study to get up to speed on these matters.
Do you have any recommended or any ways you would suggest someone to get into it? Like any programs or anything do you know of that would help?
There are a number of programs, and I would have to go back and see at what age some of these programs start. But for example, there's a program called En-ROADS through which I participated in my first internships at GE Energy, which operates nationwide and has relationships with a ton of companies. So that's a good start. There's another organization called SEO that has a similar program in the legal space, and there may be other opportunities like that as well. Generally, a lot of times on a more local or regional level, at a lot of these research schools, there'll be some sort of summer program or institute. For example, at least 2 or 3 years when I was in high school, I spent 1 to 2 weeks in the summer at a program called Partners for Mentoring in Engineering and Computer Science that was hosted by the University of South Carolina. And, whatever else I had going on, sports, concerts, otherwise, I always looked forward to that week or 2 weeks, catching up with old friends who, were coming from high schools across the region. And, we were working on problems. We were going on field trips to engineering companies, folks who were making airplanes and things of that sort. And so, really kind of getting that exposure early on, I think is just a huge boon, just in terms of sparking interest and starting to build networks, connections, and experience that you can then leverage as you're applying to schools or as you're applying for jobs or other opportunities.
Yeah, I've heard of a couple, or I've looked into a couple. I know I don't know if you've heard of Adapt.
Yes.
There's one, right? Yeah, I think I've heard of that one. I'm not part of it, but I'm looking into it.
Yeah.
And then I believe there's also NCPP. Another one that I'm looking into. Are you aware of that one?
Is that the National Council of
Yeah, Patent Practical.
Yes, yes. I am aware. If we're talking about the same thing, one of my classmates who I literally went through Georgia Tech, Braxton.
Yes, I was going to ask you about that after this.
Yeah, we should definitely talk about that. Yeah, so I'm intimately familiar, and I think it's a great space, and they're doing great work. So happy to talk with you more later about that.
Well, I think that's the end of the interview. Is there anything else you wanted to add or say at the end of this?
Yeah, I think, again, thanks to you and thanks to Ashley for the opportunity to be here today. This has been great, no matter what I'm doing or how busy I am. This is something that I'm always excited about, just the opportunity to share a bit about myself, my story. And again, to the extent that I can help someone else through my story, I'm always happy to do that. I think something else that I would just want to leave folks with, particularly as it stands to the law, and we touched on it before, the law is a toolkit, but at the end of the day, I view my role as partnering with clients to solve critical problems. And, in terms of how I rely on my engineering, finance, and law background, there's attention to detail, there's risk assessment, but at the end of the day, I think the most important thing we can do for our clients is we're not just here as lawyers to say, no, you can't do this, and here are some guardrails, and you figure out what happens in between. It's to really know our clients, to know their business, to understand their specific risk profile or tolerance, and then to provide bespoke, actionable guidance. It's not, here's a memo that summarizes the law, you figure it out. It's based on your business and your particular needs, here are the 2 or 3 actionable things that you should or should not do, or who you should reach out to mitigate risk and to make progress towards solving your problem. And, just really getting into that particular mindset early, I think can pay huge dividends for folks as they navigate their careers. And then, the final thing I would say, what I always tell folks when I'm mentoring, is really start building meaningful, lasting relationships with people now at all levels and no matter what they do, because it's a small world and you'd be surprised at how people move around. And for example, if you are an associate and you're thinking about business development for you right now doesn't necessarily necessarily need to be, I have to establish a relationship with the general counsel of this company, because that's a huge lift for you. What's an easier lift for you is I'm working with a counterpart who's in-house at my client. Let me build a relationship with them now, and let me do that in a way that's genuine and not transactional. Because one day it's very likely they're either going to move up at that client, and then they'll be in a position to work with you to give you business. Or, maybe they go somewhere else. And again, you never know where people wind up. And, again, having been doing it now for a decade, like, it's very interesting to see how people end up in unexpected places. And again, having a long-term lasting relationship with them puts you well ahead of the game in terms of aspects of business development that are important for people, whether you're looking to progress as partner at a law firm or in a host of other avenues. That's my advice. I hope, this has all been helpful. And Ethan, thanks again to you and Ashley for having me today.
That's a great piece of advice to take away from this. If anything, everything, but especially that's awesome. I really appreciate you being here. For anyone listening, if they want to connect with you, do you have somewhere they could do that?
Yeah, sure. You can always reach me at white@orrick.com. Also, I am active on LinkedIn, so feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn, and I will respond to messages there as well.
Well, thank you again for being here, and I guess end that one there.